All right, then let's get started. Okay, Amanda, the floor is yours, and you just tell me next slide whenever you're ready.
You got it. Thank you so much, Steens. Thank you so much for all of y'all for putting this on and for having me. I'm excited to be here. I think this is my second time doing this presentation. The first time I did it was, I think, a mere 2 years ago, but I feel like as an editor, I never feel fully confident. I'm always trying to get better and get clearer and have more perspective. And I ended up kind of re editing this to update it to, what it feels like to be an editor now, give you a little bit more transparency on like the ins and outs, the challenges, and also like all the upside that comes from being an editor. But some of it you have to fight for a little bit. So this is how to be an editor, or work with an editor. Yeah, I'll just say a little bit about me. Next slide. So I'm Amanda. I have been just like I've been in comics for about 14 years now, and it started in like pre-literate, like toddlerdom. I was reading comics. Um, Garfield is like basically like my gateway into reading when I was like 3. I was a weirdly hyper literate kid, but mostly for comics. And that meant my dad took us to the library all the time, and I checked out all kinds of stuff. And I also fell in love with X-Men and all of the like early 90s kind of comics because I'm an elder millennial. But I went to just regular public school. I went to regular community college, very, very good one. And then finished at like a university that was like next door. Didn't matter. I was working for the whole time, so didn't have like a typical college experience. I was just, hand to mouth kind of working a very bougie job to pay for, textbooks essentially. And then around 2009, I got my first ever book publishing opportunity. um, there was a publisher in LA called Phoenix Books. They're no longer here, but they were in LA, and I started in publicity. And that was a real like trial by fire. I learned a lot about what like mainstream book publishing is like. I learned from some elders who had been in New York what it was like over there. I was taught about contracts. The editor in chief kind of took me under his wing and helped me understand the sort of business end of it, which I was less familiar with. I was like a mere 23 years old. Um, but yeah, and then around 2010, my partner Jeffrey and I started a small press, as I kind of learned more and more about how little control authors can have sometimes in mainstream publishing. I wanted to like make my own decisions, and I was in my 20s and didn't think about whether my body would continue to be able to work as hard as it did then. But we started The Devastator. It was a small press, only comedy. We ran that for about 8 years. So from there, Trump happened, more weird things happened to the economy. We decided to sort of Seinfeld, like peace out while we were still happy. It was very hard to do. I worked in ad agencies for a while. It was a really great way to learn how to be under the gun and write lots of things, and come up with easy to grasp concepts in short periods of time. Um, and then I was called up by Lionforge, and I worked there with Steens. And I think like one of the greatest things about that job was the community of people that came out of it. And yeah, Steens and my friendship has only continued and continued on from there. But it also was a weird job where it permutated a lot. So it turned into Oni Press eventually. I started running one of their imprints, the queer imprint, Limerence Press. And then I started freelancing after Oni laid a bunch of people off in 2022. So I freelanced for about a year and a half until I got hit up by someone at Andrews McBeal, who Andrews McMeel is best known as the publisher of Heart of the City by Steens, and lots of incredible syndicated cartoonists like Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes and Kathy. Um, So it's a really fun full circle thing for me to have like just been like a poor kid in the like outside slums of Disneyland and the bad part of Anaheim, just reading Garfield from the newspaper, and then kind of now I can sort of say I know the cat a little bit better. My comics trajectory was very much that. It was like it started in comic strips, then mainstream comics. Then I got really into graphic novels as an adult, and that has only gotten me into weirder and more indie stuff. I'm a zine collector. I love getting mini comics at zine fests and comic shows. But yeah, my trajectory from like kind of mainstream to very indie to like mid-range indie to like big indie, I guess. Andrews McMeel's a large publisher, but they are not like the big four in New York. They're not publicly owned or anything. But yeah, next slide. Um, the Devastator, if you want to know more about the small press that my partner and I ran, you could go to devastatorpress.com. We still have pages up for all of the weird books and zines that we did. It was a range of comics to just like weird comic prose. So yeah, and then next slides are just some photos and covers. That's some Devastator stuff. And then up next, on the next slide, are some books that I did at Lion Forge and Oni Press. Next slide. And yeah, and then those guys. And then there's some three more pages of just like some cool covers. Um, just to give you an example of like the range that comics can take. There are lots of formats and trim sizes across all of these. Some of these are comic strips that are like in big trim sizes that are long, and some are like these little digests. So comics can take all kinds of forms. And these are some of the books that I've been working on at Andrews McMeel that are coming out this year. So yeah, I think going into the like meat of the heat, I'd say like, all right, this is a lot of work, but why do we need editors? Why does anybody need an editor? Um, and so I'll kind of give you like a cursory glance at what that looks like. So that's basically a gatekeeping job, and people will have there's a lot of discourse about the ethics around being a like creative gatekeeper in the media and having to represent the publisher. But also champion the voices you want to champion. You're also the middle person between parties. So you're like the person in house at the publisher if you work in house, or if you're freelance, you're sort of mediating between maybe the creator and an artist. And if you're in-house, there's like the additional factors like the marketing department and the production department and all of these other people that you are sort of in charge of taking responsibility for as the team leader. So you kind of own the project through the whole way. And that also includes from the beginning, you're negotiating deals. And we'll talk a little bit more about like how that goes in the acquisitions process. But you do have to touch some numbers if you are in-house at a like publisher. There's like spreadsheets and budgets sometimes. And the fun part, you give feedback. You are trusted with your voice and your opinion and your informed research and the whatever your passions or expertise are. We want editors to lead with that. And you solve emergent problems when you have multiple factors. It's a team sport. You're sort of the quarterback who's course correcting in the middle of the play. So yeah, going into the next slide, that sort of looks like for a publisher, they want their editors to acquire what's called the front list. That's the new books that are coming out, the books that are coming out now and coming out in the next couple of years that we're working on. Um, and those are usually things that get the most attention, rightfully. To get to buying a front list, you need to read and sort through lots of submissions. And to do that, you're also forming a lot of relationships with agents who represent a lot of creators if you're in-house at a publisher. And if you're also looking at all these submissions, you need to be able to like know what's up in the world, what's going on culturally, what are the trends in the genres you work in. You also, like we said, being a team leader means you have to do some approvals. Sometimes you got to do the yay or nay on something that may seem trivial, but like you have to commit to it now. And so you have to kind of know when to say, all right, good. And then like getting into after a book comes out, you're maintaining the metadata, which is all of the information for a book. When you search a book and you see all the descriptions and the quotes and the details, it's this many pages. All of that is something that the editor helps maintain on the back end to make sure all of that's accurate. And that also means the backlist, which are all the books that have come out before. And the backlist may not be every book that they've ever made, but it may be all the books that like kind of hung in there. They stay strong. Like there are some Calvin and Hobbes books at my job that are just always going to be reprinted. And so they're in the backlist. And that means you need to update the metadata and all of that boring stuff for it too. And then going to the next slide, talking more about submissions, agents are your key to understanding what's out there, what authors are pitching, what agents are looking for is always interesting to know, so you can figure out what kind of agents you want to talk to. So they want you as an editor to be their contact at the publisher if you're in-house, and also keep them up to date on what you want. So we call that a wish list, a manuscript wish list, something both agents and editors use as a term. But it goes both ways. We try to keep on top of what we're looking for, so we don't pitch each other stuff that we don't need. And so that means you're reading a lot of proposals and you send feedback and updates. I feel like the number one email you'll send to an agent if you ever worked in-house at a publisher is confirming receipt. That will happen a lot. And it's important. You want to honor all the work that has been gone into to bring a book to the point that it's ready for a publisher by giving it as much attention as you can if it's relevant. And that means championing their clients in-house at the publisher you work at, and answering all of their emails. There's a lot of them. Next slide. Creators, if you are in traditional publishing, creators are usually with an agent, and I strongly always recommend having an agent. You don't always need one right away, but when you start feeling like you want to work in books, you want that for sure. You need an advocate. But on the other end, the editor in the house at the publisher is really doing most of the work in terms of the creation of the book. Once the agent has pitched it and sold it to the editor, it's on the editor's lap now. So we've got to give structure to the book. So that means developmental edits, looking at the outline. Um, Setting expectations, letting them know what's going next, like what's the process going to be, letting them know what to expect at what time, and pitching their book. You have to be able to pitch their book in a compelling way to lots of different people inside of the publisher you work at. Um, or if you are like freelance editing for a client and you're submitting their books for awards, there's lots of things that you will need to stay on top of, and always knowing that elevator pitch is important. And speaking of feedback, we always track revisions. We are the ones supposed to maintain continuity. And the Cats movie, when like Judi Dench had the wedding ring, like the editor should have caught that. Same thing in books. Like those are things that we're supposed to catch, and the creator should always look good. We don't want them to fall on their face. And that means keeping them on schedule. Can be some hand holding. Sometimes you need to have late night calls. with crying. That's happened with me. And those have always honestly been some of the best books I've worked on when we were vulnerable. Um, and getting paid, man. You need the editor in-house at the publisher to approve stuff and send the email and tell the people in finance to cut the check. And sometimes you got to follow up. So sometimes you find yourself just kind of being a bounty hunter for for checks sometimes, depending on where you work. But yeah, overall, creators really want the editor to be their advocate through all of the process. Next slide. So I'll talk a little bit more about a creator's point of view. Up next, um, hiring an editor as a creator means you kind of you kind of already have enough of your idea that you can explain it to someone else. That would be like your creative vision. Like if you've got like a blue sky idea that's like one page. That can be enough sometimes, but it's, I think, really good for you to have really figured out what you want from a project before you approach an editor, so that you can be really clear about what you want. And so that's creative and in terms of like business and process. So your goals for the book or the project are really important. If you want an editor to really help you with like maintaining consistency in character designs, maybe that's something that you struggle with. Then that's something that you talk about early and you figure out how you want to go over that process of development art. As an example. But yeah, as an editor, freelance or like a bud who's helping, either way, you need communication. It's super important to be able to tell them what you're thinking and also say no to a note. It's okay to do that. It's okay to have healthy conflict. And I think when you are ready to hire an editor, it means you are ready to have those kinds of generative conversations where maybe you don't agree, but you come out of it with a better understanding of your book. Also, a contract. There are contracts online. There are boilerplates that you can find. Highly recommend looking up Gamal Hennessy and some other resources on his website, where you can kind of learn more about the business legal end of a contract in comics. But for just hiring an editor freelance, you don't need anything too complicated. Next slide. So talking to them more about that communication piece, it is an email job. A lot of editors will give you a phone call. Some are in texting distance with you. Some people will never be that close, and that's good and fine too. But you want to like kind of agree on like how responsive you guys need to be. What timeline are we on? If you're someone who like me will email, like will send replies either within 3 seconds of receiving something or within like 3 to 8 business weeks. It just sort of depends on when it hits me. So like it's always good to sort of be upfront about like how often and how and when you need replies. You also need to know your selling points. Why is this book such a great idea? Why is this comic such um, like an important thing for you to be spending all of your time and resources on at this moment? And what is the experience that the reader is going to have on the other end? What do you intend for the reader to have done, within themselves in the reading experience? Like all of those things should be considered when you're talking to an editor because they're thinking about that when they look at your stuff. They're thinking about what you want versus what they perceive is best practice. So the more you can inform them, the better. And yeah, that also means like raising the flag early. If like, oh, I've got like a thing coming up, I've got to go to a funeral, I need 2 more weeks. Like just saying those things early is always good because the editor will help figure out the schedule, and they can adjust it while you're off taking care of the funeral. But if you wait until after you've come back, you may have lost some critical time and you're also maybe more exhausted and it's not as pleasant of a conversation. um, So yeah, put your needs up front. Make sure that the editor is informed, and so they aren't acting against your wishes. They have to know what you like. So ask them a lot of questions about how they're assessing stuff. Ask them questions when they ask you questions about notes. It's something that editors expect to have those kinds of conversations and ask weird questions. Next slide. So, if you are talking to an editor who's in a publishing house, you want to be aware of the acquisitions process, which is kind of a weirdly protracted experience. It can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 years, depending on what's happening with the contract, who the lawyers and agents are, who the creator is, like what's the conflict. But it all starts with the proposal. And as we talked about, you are looking at this stuff already. So you've already gotten pretty familiar with the material by the time you're pitching it to your house. So you're also like doing research in the marketplace. So you put together comparative titles. That's what we call books that have come out in the last like 2 to 3 years that are similar, similar category, similar topic, but similar format even. But it's important to have those because it's a business to business experience, which I'll get into later. You want to make sure that you've got comps that retailers and distributors appreciate and go, oh, good, I would want to buy that. So yeah, you have an editorial meeting. The whole team will kind of look at your stuff, and you look at their submissions too, and you give each other feedback. Sometimes things need to get revised before they come back, and that's happened a few times where it's like, oh, can you? We have this note about the age of this character because if you want it to be YA, they need to be a teenager. Then it's like, okay, we still like everything else about this story, but can you rewrite that bit? Sometimes we need to see what that looks like. So that'll happen. And then you have this big meeting where it's like the publisher and the finance people and like the marketing people, and they're assessing the material and your pitch for the material and going, this is why it's a perfect book for us. And then you make a budget, which is called a profit and loss, P&L. And that's where you kind of do some dark math. Depending on where you work, it could be like a whole like web form or it could be a spreadsheet. There are lots of ways that it's calculated, but you're basically figuring out the cost of making the book and giving payment to the creators against, how much you think you'll make. And that informs your offer. You write an offer letter to the creator and agent going, we are so happy to make this book with you. Here's what we want to pay you. Here's your royalties, etc. And that's when we get into negotiating. They might ask for a little bit more money. That pretty much always happens. And they're always right. Pretty much always right. It's very rare that they're wrong. But it becomes a little tug of war and we land on something we are all comfortable with. And then a contract gets drafted. And usually, as an editor, you can kind of chill while this is being like, bandied back and forth. You just need to keep tabs on it and make sure everyone's like still chill. But and then you're just kind of pivoting to the creator and working on the book with them. And once the contract is like solid, you announce it in the trades. And that's always fun. If you've ever followed creators and you see them put their little announcement or their deal on Blue Sky, like that's like a very fun prize at the end of this weird process. So going into the next slide, that is brings us to like what is the day? What is the whole day for an editor? What do you all do? Next slide. Here's just like a rough estimate of like pie chart of where a lot of my time goes. About 49% is emails. Like it's pretty much half of the day is responding to emails, and those emails contain lots of important information. It's just how you have to express all of the feedback. If you do a phone call, it's great, but if you don't have the notes written down, you might miss something. So a lot of emails, and when things are in writing, depending on what state you're on, it's binding. So that's important. Then meetings are about 30% of the time. We are discussing stuff as a group. being an editor inside of a house is like being a part of a committee, and everyone has different roles and everyone has different specialties, and you go and sort of, cross pollinate with them and figure out like what is the right way to go forward in the front list of the book, what the books should be coming in the next few years. So a lot of meetings are about that, and also with agents and creators. I like this morning I had like a nice little half-hour phone call with a creator of a crossword book, and we were talking about the kids version, and it was like, this is a great conversation, but I need to go. um, and that happens, but yeah, the actual like editing ends up being like around 20% of the time, because by the time you get to like 4 or 5 o'clock, it's like all of the most important production stuff. You've looked at some proofs. You've responded to a bunch of submissions. You've proofread a bunch of stuff going out to the printer, and now it's time to actually look at some manuscripts that you're actually working on that are like on your slate. So sometimes the nights and weekends are where that stuff falls. I try very hard to keep like a hard boundary and a work-life balance, but is something to talk about as an editor. That becomes a challenge if you work in-house at a place. You have a little less control over how much your workload takes over. Uh, Going to the next slide, the submissions process. We've talked a lot about it already, but this is the real this is like the real what do I want to say? Gauntlet. Um, and it's basically a filtering system, and it's not something that is done, I think, like especially well or especially organized across any like given publisher. But a lot of submissions come in, and depending on the place, they either have an open submission policy or they're just batting them down as they get them, but they always get them. So usually the youngest editors on staff, the associate editors, the assistants, people who are newer to the company are the ones who are reading most of the stuff, and they're filtering. Then you have a lot of meetings to talk about stuff and winnow out the slush pile to find the diamonds in the rough. And that means like assessing the content quality, which is always subjective, and that can like be something that comes up a lot in your meetings as an editor. Are like, what are our standards? What's our culture? And so you're thinking about like, what does this company do best when you're looking at submissions? And you're looking at art. If it's comics, you really, really want to have sample art. So that's a big part of the content assessment. Um, and then, yeah, there's the whole like agent versus unagented thing. Depending on the publisher, most publishers only want an agented pitch, for like a lot of like legal reasons. They don't want to accidentally do something else that's similar, whatever it may be. It's an old timey system. So it's important to know like if you're pitching to editors, whether they even take pitches from creators or not. So also part of looking at a pitch is assessing the author platform, something that is like a dreaded term for editors currently. I think honestly, it used to be comps, and now it's really this like author platform conversation where you're like, how many followers do they have? What's their TikTok like? And that can sometimes rule out really, really good stuff. Like all the time that happens, where it's like, this is great, but we don't know how to break this out. From nothing. And so that's something you're thinking about, what the marketing team is going to like. And that requires thinking about the media potential. Is this a creator who's going to like be able to go on NPR to talk about their life story? Or is this going to be a kid's comic that needs to be in libraries and doing a very specific interest? Like those are things that you are thinking about too. What are those hooks. And if it's like a genre thing, like there's always a conversation about where we are in a trend. Currently, romantasy is the hottest thing, and people do not agree on like where the line is. Is it just a romance book? Is this a fantasy book? And you have to ask yourself, if this is trendy now, if I buy a book now and it takes like 2 years to make it, will it still be like poppin' when it comes out? Sometimes it's not. A great example of this, and we'll get more into the whole diversity challenge that we continue to struggle through. But in 2020, a lot of really great book deals were penned, and those books then came out in 2022, 2023, 2024 in a very different environment. And those are like that's the kind of cultural sensitivity you need to have, and so that you can overcome those challenges. But if you aren't anticipating the next sort of sea change, it can be really hard to adapt after the fact. So a lot of stuff gets ruled out just because it's like, oh, we don't think it's going to still work in 5 years. Going to the next slide. Is this just marketing? And the answer is yes. You increasingly, and as an editor inside of a publisher, have to very much like internalize and think and consider the marketing and sales point of view. How am I going to get them excited about it? And that requires just being a little bit creative, a little bit calculating. Because publishing is business to business. When you think about like, well, why would this publisher make this decision? Don't they understand their readers? And the answer is they do, but they more value what Barnes and Noble thinks. They value more what the Amazon buyers think, because those are the people who are giving them the funds to keep going. The distributor and retailers are where the money truly comes from for them. So they're making sure that these things are like, oh, I know exactly how this is going to get merchandised. This buyer at Barnes and Noble is going to love this coloring book, whatever it may be. Those are things that we're thinking about when we're looking at new stuff to acquire at a house. And the question, who is this book for, will come up a lot. You need to know an audience. You don't always need to have an audience, but I think with the way everything is so segmented and fragmented now, you really do need to have a picture of like, where does this person get their books? Is what kind of stuff do they read? And so we put together like a little bit of reader data, online trends. Um, we're trying to overcome the fact that discovery online is hard. The internet is not what it was in 2019. It's very, very different. Google does not work. You have to do a special thing to like make it not do AI, which I did. You should look it up. But you really do have to like research a lot of stuff and make sure that you are positioning the book by like showing its best face to marketing. And that means like some of editing is also marketing, and that's a conflict. It happens all the time. It can be a really healthy conflict, but it still can be frustrating when you just want to do something that you love, but you have to think about all of these other considerations. Um, so um, we have this this formula. The book, what's the book? Is a 300 page graphic novel memoir about a summer camp. And it's like, all right, great. What's the hook? It's at a summer camp, but there's a cryptid or something that happened, and then what's the twist on that trope? You need that what's different, what's unique, what makes this something that you have to pick up. And then the cook, who is behind it? Is this the right person for the book? That happens sometimes. You pick up a book and it has certain kinds of characters in them, and then you look inside and you're like, okay. And that happens all the time in publishing, but that's why it's really important to assess, is this author the right person? Is this straight white male maybe the best person to write this book about like Black queer youth? Like these are kinds of questions you have to consider in the formula, because you're telling the story of why this book is so cool. And the author is the centerpiece of that. Um, And then there's the whole formula of what you like times what sells. You will have to cross-reference the things you love most with what has historically done well for the place you work. And you make little concessions, but then you also take risks, and you push where you can. But there's always the phrase, "Don't confuse what you like for what sells." To the next slide. So yeah, once you actually get to the part where you're having fun. You're actually working on the book. This is like, all right, creator, you got your payment. I'm giving you a page template. Let's go. But like also in freelance, it's all right. You've given me like your creative brief or your all of your materials. You've given me what you have so far. We've had some conversations. Let's go. And there's lots of things that can go into developmental editing. If you're just helping someone figure out what to do next and they just want their portfolio looked at, you can look at their portfolio and help them identify things that they might want to work on or expand on. Um, you can look at their proposal and be sort of a pitch doctor where you go, oh, you know what, you forgot, this one book is just like your book and it sold 1 million copies. You got to mention it. Or, you actually don't emphasize like how important your background is to why you're writing this nonfiction comic. Like those are things that you might hear when someone is looking at your proposal, and it is very much a developmental thing. And that includes story outlines. If you are like working with a freelancer and you've already kind of noodled on some stuff, you're really going back to the blueprints and going, okay, how does this work? Is this sound? Should I beat this out into a page by page? Um, and then there's dialogue editing. And that's another thing an editor can do. If someone already feels like they've got the script down, they know what it wants to be, but they want the dialogue to be in a certain accent, or they want the dialogue to have a certain tone that they are not as good at. Sometimes a sort of writer editor person can come in and punch up just the dialogue. It is sort of like a weird extension, mutant offshoot of the Marvel way. So there's also research. Sometimes you're just helping a creator like put together all the stuff that they have. If they're making a nonfiction comic that requires a lot of research, they may need you to help organize it. um, and then translating things. Kind of like with dialogue editing, you're really more like working on the meaning of it and making sure all of the meaning is conveyed in the new language. So sometimes you're the person doing it. I've done some French comics and I have like remedial French and I can do pretty well with comics. So I do that sometimes. But there's also localizing where you take maybe a too literal or bad translation and try to get it back to voice. And those are kind of softer line edits that you can do on something that's already been done. But that is sort of a developmental thing because it's so central to the way the book is going to be understood. So you want to make sure you know who the reader is. Okay, these are North American English speakers. Then we need to get all the U's out of the words from this UK book. Next slide. Then there's production. You have a script, you get that edited, and we call that the lettering script. That's the one that's going to get lettered. But then you get into pencils. This can take like a few months. This could take a few years. It really depends on your project and how much time you have, and what your work rate is. But this is the most important part. This is where all of the stuff gets figured out, the layouts, the pacing, how you want the chapters to break. Like all of these kinds of things are figured out in like the actual penciling. And sometimes you discover new ways to tell the story in the middle of that and you adapt. And that's part of the process for the editors to keep track of all of that, make sure that all of the documents get reconciled with any new changes. So then you get into inks and you're really just solidifying what you have. You're not doing any major changes and not even minor changes, hopefully. Um, And then you go into letters, and depending on whether the creator is lettering their own work or if we're working with a freelance letterer, we make sure that they've got that lettering script correct and that we have enough space for things. Word count, character count are very important. So our font and readability, making things accessible to people with different reading abilities, that's a big part of lettering. And as an editor, you want to make sure that that matches up with who's going to be reading this book. And then colors and flats, flats and colors, making sure that you've got all the layers down, that you've got the shading down, you've got the texture down. Um, there's a lot of little finishing touches that happen in colors. And even if you're doing limited color or black and white, there may be some additional shading that you do. So it's always important to, like, go at least do one pass, maybe two passes on colors. Um, and then next slide. Copy editing is a little bit more straightforward, but it can take a lot of forms. So you want the book, once it's like you've got like either inks or colors and the letters are in, you send that to a copy editor, and they're just making sure that everything is like within the Chicago style or whatever style they're working in. It could be a house style at the publisher, matching those things up, and then correcting little grammar and spelling mistakes. If it's nonfiction, then you're fact checking. And if it's like something that needs like a lot of terminology, if it's a cookbook or a book that's like got a little bit of reference in it that you need an index, sometimes that's a type of editor who comes in just to do the indexing. Because it can be a little tedious. And then a style guide is part of the project when you have something that has its own world or has its own vocabulary, glossary. They're sort of taking all of the world that you've put into a sheet of like, these are the terms, these are the official names and spellings of your characters, these are the official names and spellings of these businesses, of these made up places, if it's fiction. Those are important to have if you're, especially if you're doing a series. Next slide. Pre-press is when all of that stuff is done, it's clean, and you're getting it set up at the printer. If you work at a house, you have like a production manager or editor who is working on that with you, and you are making sure that things get exported from InDesign to PDF to the printer appropriately, and you look at hard proofs. They print it out, and you go over it with a pen. It's always great to look at things on paper. You always see things you did not see. It's kind of insane how many things you'll pick up when you print things out. So that's a huge part of it. You usually spend like up to a month on just proofing stuff, just to make sure that it has routing to all of the people that are on the team. Um, and if it's a freelance project that you're working on with a creator and you're sort of the liaison between the creator and the publisher, you're also approving like with the creator on all of those proofs and any final corrections that need to be made. Things can be corrected right up until you've given them the thumbs up to print. Like you could upload something and then they show it to you again. You could go, oh, actually, this one page needs this correction. You can do it, but everyone hates it. So you always avoid doing it. And then you make the ebook or EPUB version. The digital version is really important to have. There's usually someone whose job it is to do. If you're a freelance, you might help locate a freelance pre-press or digital publishing person who can make the appropriate format for you. But yeah, next slide. So there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff to editorial. There's a lot of there are a lot of questions about like how do you get a job? Like, how do you get a job in an industry that's so opaque? You can't see exactly like who you're supposed to be talking to. It's not obvious. These aren't really public figures. Um, these are sometimes small companies who don't have like the bandwidth to answer every message. So, how do you get a job? Next slide. So, I think the most important thing to remember when you are looking for a job is that 72.5% of all editors are white. And this is not new. This is only, it's actually getting better. This is a huge improvement over the last few years. We hope the trend continues to even out to some level of population proportion, but we're getting there. But that means that you are working against a current that is sort of designed to hire a certain person who is already kind of made for the job, a certain kind of like upper class person who went to the right college and maybe went to a professional publishing program before going in and maybe they know someone that's already there. Um, New York and all of the bigger publishers, there's a lot of politics that go into who they hire and when. So it's important to know what you're up against and be prepared. Next slide. So this is the industry overall. As you can see, it is almost 72% white, but the average age has gone down a little bit, which has been great because we've seen a lot of new young editors really try and work hard to make change bubble from the bottom up. Um, Great examples of this are the unions that are forming at a bunch of houses. Those have mostly been spearled by the youngest people at those companies. It's still mostly women, so it's a lot of white women in publishing, and there's a lot of like honest, practical like rationale for that, because in our current society, women read more and they read longer and they read more books. And women are more likely to pursue this profession because of the way masculinity is presented in our country, too. So I think there are a lot of contributing factors to why it's mostly women. But we also have just such a great explosion in in challenge from queer people who have joined publishers in the last several years. So we just want to keep that going. Next slide. There are a lot of publishers. There's like a ton of publishers you can work for. There are some categories I'll just kind of give you a layout for. So you've got the big four. That's your Penguin Random House, Simon and Schuster, HarperCollins, Macmillan, which houses two great comics brands for Second and the new 23rd Street, and then Hachette, which is another big one. Then there's the comics big two, your Marvel and your DC. Everyone knows them. And then you have manga publishers. So you have Viz, Kodansha, Seven Seas, Udon, so many, so many, so many more. Um, then you have like the licensed and IP people. If you're interested in doing like a Transformers comic, then you're going to need to talk to someone at IDW. If you are going to do a Dungeons and Dragons comic, I think you might need to talk to Dark Horse now. So there's a lot of like movement in license and IP publishing. And if you're someone who's interested in branded stuff, if you want to work on those big stories, those are some of the publishers who do the most high profile of them. And there are a lot of children's publishers who do comics, of course, Scholastic and Little Brown. There's also Toon Books that does some like kind of weirder, more indie stuff. And you have lots of big indies that have kind of either combined or kind of changed in the last several years, but the biggest ones kind of still are Image and Skybound, and then Dark Horse and IDW are there. Then you also have Oni and Mad Cave, which are kind of also there for kind of picking up the pieces of creators who maybe are new to comics, especially. And then we have the smaller publishers. Lots of indie presses. There are so many. When you go to a zine fest, when you go to a place like TCAF or SPX, you'll find tons of publishers that are devoted to very specific points of view, to that are just like so creator driven that is truly only what the author wants, like Bogelhan. Like there's just like a lot of option, and there are a lot of comrades in small and indie comics publishing. So this is just a handful of them. And then you have like your art house literary places, like Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly, and that's a very specific lane. When it comes to selling comics, they're always kind of sold in bookstores. So sometimes there's a little bit of like a velvet rope around those imprints, like Pantheon. But yeah, next slide. So with all of those publishers, with all of the people who are already editing like can you freelance? And the answer is yes, you can freelance. I did it. Steens does it. We take on the projects that we want, or we take on the projects that we think are most advantageous. And that is the choice you get to have as a freelancer. You have a lot more control over what you work on. If you're at a house, there are sometimes mandates. Sometimes there's like, well, we have to do this kind of comic next year, and you're going to do it. And it's like, well, that means I have less time for this other thing I wanted to do. So it's really good when you're freelance to have a strong, point of view and what you want to work on. Are you a horror comics person? You want to do a lot of horror comics? Then there's a place. There are places you can go. So, yeah, the types of jobs that you can have include pitch evaluation, like we talked about before. That includes querying agents. So sometimes they're like, can you look at the letter that I'm sending this agent? Is this right? Um, do you know this agent? Is this like what they would want to see? I've done that. Portfolio reviews, like we talked about. And then you have like copy editing and proofreading as like separate jobs. Like you can just copy edit someone's script and get a flat fee for that. You could also just be proofreading the end product when it's getting ready for the printer. There's also developmental editing. If you're like working on something and you want some editorial help before you take it to an agent or someone else, then sometimes, you hire a freelancer who's just going to help you with the outline and get the scaffolding, build the structure for you, with you. There's line editing, where you go in and just kind of make some corrections, some word choices, like, tuning up people's voice, making corrections that make someone's tone more consistent. There's lots of ways to line edit, and it is a way of looking at something that's a little bit more finished, but maybe still needs a polish. Then you have like first reading, so sensitivity reads, just like first glance reads, where you're just kind of going like, does this work? I found this error, whatever it may be. There's also project management, on the bigger end, where you come in and you're helping someone orchestrate kind of a bigger project. Like maybe someone is working on a series and it's sci-fi and it's going to be like 6 books, and they need someone to help organize all the lore and organize like the style guides and all of that. That is something that you can do and just kind of be the person who actually like regulates and referees all of the comings and goings of the project, and making sure everything is in. And that also means you could do that for a publisher. So there are a lot of publishers that hire people freelance. It's really easy to look these things up. I'll get into jobs, where to find them in a little bit, but it's important to know that, like, when you work freelance for a publisher, you can make a little bit more money than you would if you were in-house. So it's nice. You can you get paid your rate. You are still on the hook for taxes and all of that stuff, all the things that come with running your own business. But it can be cool to have a mix of individual creators and big publishers as clients. Next slide. So, some of the things you might need for a freelance editorial, we'll just kind of like go over a couple of places that I've used. There's some great like project management, web-based or app-based softwares like Trello and Airtable. I've used both. They're both great. Trello is especially great for when you have multiple people. It's very modular. You can and visual. You can move things around. Um, and then like Notion and Evernote, ways to organize your writing and your snippets, your journaling, your free associations, whatever your dump drafts. Sometimes you write those in bits, and those are good places to go. And then there's like organizing schedules, so you can use Doodle or Calendly or another app like plugin in whatever your email client is. There's lots of ways to do it. And then there's like places that you're going to be doing like a lot of the chatting. I try to keep things out of my like iMessage, so that I'm not confused about my texts. And so sometimes I get like work messages on Discord. There's also Slack. Um, there's Microsoft Teams if you get stuck with having to work on Microsoft products. And Google Suite, of course, whether or not you are interested in figuring out the privacy concerns with Google Suite. If it's just a small project, it doesn't matter. But if it's something that's like top secret, you might want to not use Google. um, but then on the creative side, there are a lot of apps you use. Adobe, Affinity Pro Suite is a great substitute for Adobe because it's so expensive to do the subscription. Like, don't waste your money on it if you can get something that does most of it. And then you have like places like Procreate and Clip Studio Paint where you can draw a lot of things. You can draw lots of different things. You can export things and mostly like they've worked on the exporting. It's better now. But it's important to make sure that when you're working on tablets that you're like, keeping track of whether it's in CMYK and whether you've got the colors sort of adjusted because those things can be different once we actually look at the printed proof. So yeah, there's a lot of places that you can go to like make a book, and there's like lots of like places on Itch.io, developers who make like zine machine type apps where you can put together mini comics really simply on any device. So there's lots of ways to do the job. And yeah, next slide. Where to look. So if you are looking for freelance or full-time, Publishers Marketplace is really the big place to go. Like you really want to see who are the agents, who are the editors. You get up to date contacts. It's just really the place where all of the industry really kind of congregates, and that's where deals get announced, and that's where agents look me up and go, "Oh, this is what she's done. These are the books that she's sold recently. I should sell her this book." Um, so it's also an incredible job board. And usually those job listings can be seen publicly. So get on the Publishers Marketplace newsletter, or get a group together and like kind of Bart and Millhouse share a subscription so that you can kind of steal the info and share it around. Um, and then there are some groups like POC and publishing. Places that are like advocacy and support groups that do mentoring and signal boost jobs when needed, and are generally like really supportive of people who are looking for editorial work. The Editorial Freelancers Association is like kind of the like more official kind of traditional association, but there are tons of great resources there, and job listings are there all the time. You can also like check the subreddits for like freelance editors. Like if you're interested in copy editing, especially, there are folks who like just are wonky about copy editing, and you might discover some contacts. LinkedIn, sadly, you do kind of need to keep an eye on because good jobs do show up there and people act on them very quickly. So you don't want to be like the 800th person to apply necessarily. And so LinkedIn is kind of useful there. If you're interested in a sort of gig economy style mediator or like a community of people who are looking for editorial assistance, readz.com is a place you can go. I have experience doing exactly one project on Reedsy, and it was a good experience. I would say you're working in a portal, and it is a good way to get new clients. And it just depends on like whether they select your profile, and if they select you, you might get lots of good work from it. There are people with entire graphic novels that like are looking for help on Readsy increasingly more often. Um, and then there's some places you can network. It's a little harder to network these days. Again, it's like in like sort of poly-crisis pandemic time, it's harder to travel to. So I say stay local when you can. If you have an opportunity to go to a sort of industry forward event, take it. An example of that would be the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, AWP. You can look up AWP, find out when the next what next year's show is going to be, and see if you can, even if you can't afford to attend the show, you could just be around and at the restaurants that everyone's at. Like there are lots of ways to sort of run into people, and that is a place where lots of editors do go. There are also major book festivals, places where it is likely that like staff from the publisher would actually be there. There are also lots of like freelance editors and ghostwriters and all types of folks who go to these festivals, and you could really link up with some people who know more people. Um, the American Library Association has great events and they do them like across the country. It's a different city every year. So it is a good opportunity if it's in your town to like go to it. You can also you can also try to get a slot in their zine pavilion, which is like a really cool place to exhibit as a creator if you make mini comics. And lots of really interesting people will come across your table. So I've met a lot of great people there. There's also award shows like the Eisners, the Harveys, the Ignatz Awards. Those are also industry forward events where the staff is likely to be there and they're there to do politicking and schmoozing. And then there's Discord channels. There are editor groups. Steen's was a moderator for one. It's really rad. And there are lots of places where people are just sharing jobs, opportunities, asking for help, and you never know where that'll lead. Next slide. So that kind of leads into like what's happening now in publishing. It's a little weird. Um, the world is weird. Things are uncertain. Um, this is a real fashy time. And when our hellscape makes it hard for a publisher to run a house, and the ways they do that are tariffs completely exploding the cost it takes to like ship something into the country from a printer. Pretty much all printers are overseas. It is actually so cost prohibitive to print in the US because so much of our industry has left our country and gone overseas that we charge a lot more for our stuff. So working domestically is not always a choice. And then there's the inflation and the rising costs of everything. Um, there's the overall on the corporate side of things, union busting and the constant waves of layoffs that make it hard for people to build on wins like diversity when it's like we made such a great impression and then someone like gets fired and then they get replaced with someone who is the opposite of that and completely undoes all of it. And that's happened at a few places in the last few years. um, Retail sales are sort of declining. They're wobbly because things are expensive. When eggs are $12, like you're not exactly thinking uh in the same like fun, oh, this book would be such a treat for me mindset that you want someone to be in as a reader. And then like the whole education slide where kids are less likely to be able to read a full book. Like there are a lot of like very practical concerns in the world that actually make it hard to make books. And that's why it's also the reason why it's the most important thing to be doing is to read. But you know, the decline means that it's more and more important for those of us who are in the business to meet people where they're at and try to make comics that reach people in all kinds of walks of life. And that's what comics do best. Also, you know, everything that Amazon does and all of the legislation that is making it very difficult and emboldening people to do a lot of bad things. Like on the next slide, where we are seeing in the last, especially last year and a half, suppressed speech. If you've been paying any attention to like award shows like the National Book Awards and the Pen Awards, there were all of these unnecessary controversies because authors were standing up for Palestine. Um, and then because those organizations were not willing to to budge from power, they just ended up sort of taking away a lot of visibility and agency from some of the best-selling Black and Brown creators. Like people who are successful are having their speech suppressed, and that also extends to book bans. We're seeing them everywhere. We're continuing to fight them everywhere. but the censorship that comes as a result is very real and like kind of silent sometimes when people are starting to anticipate a ban or anticipate someone being squirrely about something. That means people get a little bit weirder and less, a little bit more selective about things. So, we're also seeing like things that are successful that are by queer folks and black and brown indigenous folks are being like seen as anomalies, like, oh well, this was only because this author was like this, or this is only because it was vampires, or it was only because whatever. And the way we frame those things in business is what like leads to results like, people just passing on books because they're like, oh, this isn't my experience, and no longer thinking about the experience of the readers. And propaganda is a huge part of that. The budget cuts that come out of making things cost so much more means that we have to be more selective about books if you're in the house. It also means if you're a freelancer and you're helping people find talent, you're helping them find printers, you've got to work a little harder to find things in budget. And yeah, AI picking winners, things that seem like sure bets to the people at the top of companies. These things are like continuing to be challenges at every publisher. Next slide. So, as a result, if you are ever in the position inside of a publisher to work through these challenges, some of the things I would suggest are to educate yourself, know how much things cost in the type of comics you want to work on, know what your standards are. Make sure that you know who your enemies and advocates are, identify them. If there's somebody else in editorial, if there's several people in editorial who totally get what's going on, you should be cavorting with them. Then you should be questioning leadership collectively, never sheepishly on your own, making a suggestion. Get everyone together because then it's a lot harder to refuse. If you're in submissions and you're feeling a bad vibe, track rejections, take notes, get a sense of what people are saying. If they're saying this wasn't approachable or this wasn't relatable, like these are things that we can kind of see through. These are coded messages, so you want to make sure you're tracking all of that. And refuse AI tools. Don't let that screw up your good critical thinking skills. Start a committee, get the good folks together and organize. Start private support groups, even if that's just like crying together at the mocktail bar after work, and also mentor people. I have a lot of like free informational calls with people, and what comes up all the time is that folks just like are they don't expect anyone to tell them the truth about like what to expect. And it's really important for them to know that like their work has value and they don't have to just do what a publisher tells them to do. They can have principles and still fight on them instead of being so worried about having a job. Once you're in it, it's a little harder to lose your job because there are legal protections still for now. And you want to have mutual aid. You want to help people out when they're sick and maybe workers' comp isn't happening, and forming a union or a co-op, obviously. The cartoonist co-op is one of the greatest things that has come out of the last couple of years. Highly looking them up. Highly recommend looking them up because they have such a strong community, so many resources, and just tons of solidarity for folks that are in comics and also dealing with the world around them. Next slide. So with all of these like challenges and problems, like it's really important for you to know why you're going into editorial, finding your why. What is it? So I think you want to kind of get a feel for what your editorial style is. What kind of reader are you? That's first and foremost. Like, what do you read? What do you like? What do you look for? What do you hate? And who edited the books on my shelves. I can pull out a book and find on like the copyright page in the back, like, oh, here's the person who edited it. Um, Take names and then maybe look them up and you might learn some things about them. Or if you have access to Publishers Marketplace, look at them up. There's also like genre tropes, like all the types of things that you look for in work. Like you want to make sure that you have a strong opinion on those things and you know whether you do or don't want to work on something because you don't want to like say yes to something and then halfway through you're like, I actually hate this. And then your author preferences, like do you want to work with graphic novelists who do everything they're on their own soup to nuts? Do you want to work with teams? Do you really want to like orchestrate like big teams on like monthly comics? Like those are different lanes and they require you talking to different people, so it's important to know. And your age and grade preference. Like, do you only want to work on like kids' books? Do you want to work on middle grade, which is like third grade to seventh grade? Do you want to work on YA, which is like teens? Do you only want to work on adult stuff? I mostly work on adult stuff with a little bit of upper YA here and there. And I think it's just sort of up to you as an editor, like what you prefer and what your expertise is. If you love kids, then go for it. But also like know what's missing from comics that you think that you can bring. What do you desperately want to exist in comics? Next slide. And then on like the more specific side, what kind of formats do you like? Like I was saying, do you want to do like a monthly comic? Do you want to do like a vertical scroll web comic? Do you want to do a full length graphic novel? Do you want to do like novellas? Do you want to do zines? Um, these are things to think about. There's obviously different rates associated and different challenges with each format, but you can also do all of the above. It just sort of depends on what you like. And do you like working on licenses or IP? Do you want to work on branded stuff? Well, that's work for hire, or do you want things that are original? Um, do you have trouble, or do you like can you tolerate budgets and schedules? Because that does end up being quite a bit of what happens in your day is making sure that things are on schedule and on budget. And I think budget is a little easier in publishing because you set what the price is early on. But sometimes you come into problems like, oh, we actually need a new colorist, and this new colorist is a different rate. You got to kind of reconcile that and figure that out. Um, and then can you tolerate the management side of things? Can you be in a spreadsheet? Can you do data entry? Like those are things that you will end up having to do to some degree, especially if you work in-house at a publisher. Um, then like do you like get really upset when you read stuff you don't want to read that you don't like? Because like that's something to consider in terms of who you choose to work with. Because some places do like very broad general stuff and you're going to have to read a lot of boring stuff. Or sometimes you're at a place that's too specific and everything is like too much of a certain genre that you're not as like into. Like these are things to kind of think about. What are the kinds of submissions that come to this place? And do I feel like I'll be up to reading some garbage sometimes because you have to read so much. Um, and also critical thinking. Like, is that something that you enjoy doing on the behalf of others? Because some folks are really great at that for themselves, but maybe are not very good at anticipating other people's needs or thinking about like the like three steps down the line, is this decision still going to feel right? These are things that you have to kind of figure out for yourself. And I think, if you're already thinking about being an editor, it's probably a good sign that you read a lot and that you have a very good idea of what you're looking for in comics or in anything you're working on. But yeah, next slide. Oh no, what happened? There we go. Um, so this is sort of like the full boil down for me of like the two halves of the brain of an editor. You have the curious side and you have the discerning side. Um, you like the curious side is where you're like chasing fun ideas. It's the informed yes. It's the I've read all of this. I've looked this up. I feel excited about this. I'm ready to support this. And being able to like ideate, like coming up with new things with creators. Can you stay flexible? Because sometimes you're in a position where other people are rigid and you have to be the flexible one as an editor. This person has a hard out at this date, so you got to figure out how to get this work done by a certain time. Those things can happen, but that's part of the discerning side where you're like, okay, do I make this decision to cut this thing from a book to save time? Um, but yeah, you ask weird choices, you ask weird questions, and you make hard choices. Sometimes you have to give someone um, like the bad news that like oh, we got this thing back, and the lettering's a little off, like can you work on these issues, whatever it may be. And sometimes you have to hold the line when a publisher has a note like that and the creator has to make it. So it takes discernment to know how to do those things tactfully. um, you want to know your talents, like we were saying, what you're passionate about, what you do best, what you feel best about doing. um, and try to pick things that you know that those talents will shine on. That can be hard for me sometimes as an editor because I see the potential in something and I really want to make it work, but I have to step back and go, wait, am I the person to do this, like how to clean your house book? I've never done one of those books before. Or like, am I the person to do this memoir about this very specific experience that I'm not, as informed about? Like those are things that you have to sort of figure out for yourself and go, you know what? Well, I support this, so I'm going to give it to the right person. So yeah, you're looking to grow. And that means sometimes being in the uncertain territory. Sometimes you have to hold the discomfort of not having the final decision while we're all still figuring out what that decision should be. um, and on the informed no side, it really is about, yeah, dealing the practical stuff, dealing like honestly, like reconciling what you have to do every day with what you feel good about doing every day. And sometimes you can sort of, if you're in house, say, this is a practice I maybe won't take on, but this is a practice I want to institute at this place. And you try to introduce that. And sometimes it takes a little discernment to know exactly when and how to do that. But it's about also making sure that things are finished, and not tinkering forever and ever and ever. Which, if I was doing something on my own as a creator, I tinker. But as an editor, that's what I can finally put that hat on that says, no, this is actually done. So it's about like experimenting versus correcting. Um, yeah, next slide. What else? Questions?
We did it. This
We
was
did
it.
it.
Okay.
It's a lot of
So
information.
it was a lot of information, but that's okay. I mean, this is what we're here for, is for the information, you know? Okay, let me stop sharing so we can just talk to you regular style.
Regular style. Hello.
Hi. So that was really, really great. Thank you so much for doing that. I think a lot of people learned a lot from this. I know I definitely did, even though I've been an editor forever. So I've got some questions for you, and then I also want to ask the students if they have any questions as well.
Sweet.
But the first question I had is, what are some of the things that you hate to see as an editor? Because one of the things that I hate to see is a website without a name. You know, I think anyone I want to work with,
Bro.
their name should be on the
Yeah.
website. What about, is there anything that is like super easy that someone can do to make it easier on an editor's life?
Yes. Okay. I mean, absolutely names. Like, there are a lot of really great screen names out there, but when it's time for your portfolio, your website, please have your real name, the one you do business as, whatever it may be, the name you get paid as.
Yeah.
But like, I think like with pitches, I think there's nothing worse than this is an opinion, but I don't like it when a comics writer sends in a pitch for a comic with absolutely like no consideration for who the artist might be or what they want from the art, and no samples from suggested artists. I think it's like a sign that maybe they're just really interested in getting their idea made and maybe less interested in the part, or maybe less experienced in the part of actually having to work with an artist and making concessions when they need to happen.
Nice. That's very good advice. And include comics in your comics pitch.
Yeah, I think it's like a good idea generally.
Yeah, yeah.
And like there are tons of exceptions, it happens all the time, but like usually those exceptions are like from a creator who has a very strong idea of what they are going to do and how they're going to collaborate with an artist.
Yeah. Do you think you get a different type or different kinds of pitches when you're working at a publisher versus when you're working freelance? Or do you get it all the time? You'll take whatever.
Gosh, good question. I think with my current job, I get a wide range of submissions every week. But when I was freelance, I would say my submissions were more targeted. These were people who looked at my website and went, "Oh, she's the person to do this book about like a queer Black girl going through a thing or whatever." Like I was like, "Oh, that's me every day." I'm going through something. So like I look for that. But as a person at a house, you do have to read a lot of shit that you're like, I don't. Why am I looking at this? But someone needs you to look at it because the person who does cookbooks is out this week, and they need someone to just tell us if it's bad or not. And so sometimes you do that, and it's like sometimes it's really fun. Sometimes you're truly like, oh my God, what is this? But that's the fun of being in house is you get a glimpse at what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, for sure. You talked a little bit about discernment being one of the wolves inside of you.
Hmm.
How do you balance that kind of like story editorial and discernment whenever you're working and you're not just pushing in what you would do if you were the one to write the book? Because I think a lot of creators are afraid of that's what an editor is going to do, is they're going to take their work and make it the editor's work. So what
Yep.
is it, what are some things that you do to keep that from happening?
Gosh, it's like such a funny phenomenon when it happens, but it can happen really sneakily. I think from like an editor's point of view, one of the most important things is to not be a frustrated writer. If you have untapped like creative energy in you and it doesn't have an outlet, that can be a little problematic when you're working with a creator because you may not know whether or not you're projecting something that you wish you were doing onto them. I would say this happens like because I live in LA. I see it all the time in like film and television. There's a lot of people out there who are just like, I'm a manager. I'm looking for a writer. Now write me the idea that I've had for 20 years. Like it happens all the time. So yeah, I try to start with what the creator's goals and vision are. And if I can go back to that and then go back to what I'm giving notes on and be able to like see how this person would be able to address and execute that note as themselves, like that is like a skill that you build as you work with more and more creators. But I think a way to avoid the oh this is what I would do problem is by having a very strong early development process where you talk to the author about the goals and the creative vision and what their approach to things are, what their preferences for things are, what their opinion is about the characters that are in the book, like these are all like important kind of bits to the psychology of helping manage a person getting through revisions of their own work. You want to remember how you feel when you're getting notes and make sure that you are giving grace. Sometimes it means asking a question and not just, dictating something. I mean, it's one of the easiest ways to not make that mistake is to be like, more rakes. But like it's important to know when it's your preference versus theirs.
Yeah. I think asking the question is really great advice because I always tell people when I'm working with them as their editor is the majority of these notes are just going to be questions because a lot of times when you're writing you don't know if what's in your head is actually getting on the page, and
That's right.
so a lot of times the answers are there. You just need to ask the right questions. Um, so when you were doing freelance. You had already had Devastator underneath your belt as like a project that you had done on your own.
Right.
Um, typically, when I go to shows or when I talk to people who are going to shows, I tell them, have some work done before you start asking people to give you a job, you know? Is it the same situation with editorial? Should you try and like edit an anthology or something like that just on your own, and just so that you have it under your belt? Or is there another way to go about that?
I mean, that's such an important piece of the puzzle when you're trying to figure out how to get a job. Excuse me. I really suggest, let's see, I'm looking at this document. Um, I would suggest making sure that you have made a decision to do this like for at least part time. And if you have, then I would talk to folks about doing anthologies. I think editing in anthologies is a great way to get like little doing it in snacks too, not like a full project. That's like a lot to just jump into. So anthologies are a great way to do that. Another great way is if you're in school or out of school or maybe interested in taking an art class. There are lots of like free and sliding scale ones out there, depending on where you live. You may or may not find people that you can do a sort of tradesy sort of role reversal kind of game with, where you edit their work, they edit yours, and if any of those things get printed or published, then you have that credit. I do recommend doing that with people who are also into doing comics. Like that's like I mean, kind of how the Devastator started, how a lot of small presses start is like a couple of collaborators kind of going, I'm gonna help you on this book, I'm gonna help you on this book. And then it kind of becomes its own slate, it has its own voice. That can happen sometimes. But I think it's great to use your community if you can to start editing. And if you can't, then signing up for like discords that have like creators in them, going to like cartoonist co-op and other organizations that have just like resources and like get together opportunities to meet more people who are making comics. And if you know what you desperately want to do in comics and you meet someone who kind of has a really like complementary goal, then that can be all you need to like get one really great credit. So it just depends on where you're at in life and if you've got people in your life who also do comics. But if you don't, there are places, and going to like the Freelance Editorial Association is a good place to start too, because they have some like objective advice on like how to look for stuff.
Okay, well, I have one more question for you. So while I'm asking this question, think of your own questions, okay? Because I'm going to ask
Yes.
for questions. So now's the time to think. Okay, so a lot of your work that you gravitate towards is comedy and like humor based. Um, do you think it came from your general love of comedy, or did you like fall into it and be like, oh, actually, this is great?
For me, it was like both and like I didn't know that my current job existed like when I was 18. What I did know is that I wanted to be like a comedy writer of some kind. I thought about like at one point I was like maybe I'm gonna be at a magazine. And then like when I was in high school, The Onion was like new, and and I was one of the weird kids at school who had the onion in my binder. So like I had like I as like I got older, new things emerged that like Gen Xers and older millennials were doing that were finding their way to me, and I'm going, oh, you could do that. And then Kickstarter becoming a thing in 2009, I think that was like another revelation. I didn't think I could make my own stuff because I would never have the upfront money to do that. And then Kickstarter came around, and then it was like, wait, we have a new way of conceiving this. But with comedy, I just was a comedy kid as like just through and through. I was a Comedy Central in the 90s person. I was a Late Night with Conan O'Brien person, SNL and Mad TV, all of them. And I really do appreciate like the construction of a good joke. I really love humor comics in particular. So these things just sort of like folded together over time. And it sort of by the time Jeffrey and I were doing The Devastator, we had both done some like online comedy writing and have done like failed pilots and stuff like that. So we were definitely like in the comedy world. And then we took a piece of the comedy world in LA and kind of turned it into comics. But yeah, and now that I'm like at Andrews McMeel, I can kind of do more humor again, which is really nice. So I'm really glad that comedy was one of my ways in because I'm not as into genre. I love genre comics, but I'm not someone who will only read a certain genre. So I like a lot of stuff, and if it's funny, I'll read pretty much anything.
No, I think that's great. Stick to what you like, stick to the things that move you forward, and, stay open to opportunities. A lot of the times the comics industry comes down to luck and
Yeah.
opportunity. And so as long as you are open to that and you're doing the things that you want to do, you'll get to wherever you're supposed to be? So, okay. Any
That's
questions from
right.
our students? Any at all? Yes.
You mentioned earlier that when you're freelancing, you can kind of focus on something specific, a specific area like copy editing or pre-press. Is that something that you can do like while working with a bigger publisher as well, or just freelance?
Did you hear the
That's a
question?
good. Yes, I did. That's a
Okay.
great question. So I will say there is another piece of editorial, which is its own department, production editorial. And if you're at like a biggish company, there is a team of production editors and production managers. Production managers are usually the person who talk to the printer. So they are doing a lot of pre-press stuff, but like being a production editor can sometimes require you to do that too. So if you were interested in the technical side of editing, there is a great place for you in production editorial. It is a more rigorous job and it is a more exacting job, and that can be great for certain people who love that kind of work and less into the politics and the slush pile stuff and the sort of creator management stuff. You could be the person who's just making sure all the stuff comes in right, and that you're the person either copy editing or hiring a copy editor, and making sure that everything gets fixed before it goes to the printer. That can be its own job at a publisher. So yeah, look for production editorial jobs.
And do you think that's something that can be done like in addition to like a full day job? Like, could you have your day job be production editorial and then also do freelance production editorial? Does that typically vibe with publishing houses?
Yeah, I would say so. There are quite a few folks, like in marketing and in production editorial, who will even write their own books, for the company. Like, so you can still be creative. You're just on a different team. You're not going to be like, if you're in production editorial, you're not sitting in on like the acquisitions meetings, but your boss is, and so they're sort of relaying a lot of that information to you usually. But if you want to do freelance, like in some ways, production editorial is a little more cut and dry. If you get your work done, there's less likelihood that you need to take anything home with you. So you could just like do creative stuff once you're off the clock. I see that all the time.
Great. Okay. Any other cues? Any other questions? Yes.
What's one of your favorite projects you've ever worked on?
What's one of your favorite projects that you've ever worked on?
Ooh, okay. What do I have next to me? But one of my favorite comics I ever worked on is called Smooth City,
Yeah.
by Kenny Kyle, the hilarious Kenny Kyle. He's a really funny cartoonist who's also had like such a wild like creator life. He's done art for like Big Boy and other rappers, and like has done all kinds of like weird projects, but his comedy is just so good. And this is a really fun New Jack Swing caper about like a new edition style reject boy band trying to make it big. And yeah, lots of calamity occurs when they sign up with a dodgy manager. It's one of my favorite things I've worked on. It's so funny.
It's called Smooth City, Smoove, Smooth City. Yeah, yeah, it's a very good one, very funny. Good question. Any other questions? Hmm? Hmm? Yes.
I'm just curious about like life cycle of trends. Curious about, something's been popular for a few years. When do you know, or is there a moment that you know that it's kind of waning or dying?
Mm.
Yeah, that's a great question. The main way you know is there's vibes and then there's sales data. So the vibes are like what does everyone in the room you're in think? Like what are their opinions? Are they in on this trend? Are they someone who's like maybe reluctant or skeptical of the trend? Because that can sort of sway the decision. A lot of time could just be like people's personalities, honestly. Sometimes someone's just a nervous Nelly and they don't want to do it. But sometimes they are right, and something comes out and it flops because the trend died. I'm trying to think of a book where that may have happened. Well, I did mention some. There were just like a wave of books by Black and Brown creators just across publishing that didn't get the marketing that they deserved in the last few years because the makeup of those companies was different than what it was when they bought those books. So sometimes that's the case too. Like if you're at a place that has a lot of turnover, maybe you're less concerned about that. But yeah, I think the other part of it, the math part, is as an editor, if you're at a publisher, you usually get access to something called BookScan, and it is where all of the major retail data goes. It is, I would say, indicative of like anywhere from 40 to 60% of sales. It doesn't capture everything, but it's a good indicator. So we use it a lot. So that's something that you can do is like as the seasons go, you look up how things are selling at other publishers that are in the same category, and you can kind of see like what the trend is. You can make graphs and stuff using BookScan to like find that data and compare and contrast it. So that is part of the analysis of figuring out like if something is dead or will be dead soon. Another part of the math is how long does your publisher usually take to get things to come out. Some people work on very fast projects, things that are like collections or whatever, where they're getting it out within a year. And if you're at a place where things come out like it takes like 3 years to work on a book, then that question becomes a little bit more underlined.
Yeah. Also, BookScan doesn't always take into account comic book stores. They also
It
don't
does
take.
not.
Yeah, Comicron does, and that's comic dash CHRON, Comicron. And so you have to think about like, when these publishers are looking up sales data, they may not be looking at the sales that you anticipate them looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it comes to vibes, that's why I think it's important to not just read, but just be open to what's going on around you in terms of publishing, literature, that sort of thing. Because we just had a time where a ton of books were going from webcomic to print publishing.
Yeah.
And so that's something there was a wave of that, and you have to be able to recognize when those things happen. So, staying abreast of these sorts of things are nice. Okay, great
Yes.
question. All right, one more question. We got one more. Make it a good one or a bad one. Yes, all the way to the back.
As a freelance editor, how do you turn down projects that you're not interested in working on?
Did you hear the
Oh,
question?
I did.
Great.
If you are freelance, how do you turn down a project that you're not interested in? There are some ways to do it. I have a few categories loosely. One is like, is this like, do I have like a practical veto reason that I can put in the forefront? So, this is actually like an illustrated novel. I don't really do those. I only do comics or like this is 300 pages. I just don't have the time to do 300 page project this summer. So maybe another time. Sorry. Or those kinds of like ways that you can easily get away from it. If it's something, especially if it's something where you're like, it's not that it's horrible, it's just that it's not for me, and I don't want to hurt someone's feelings by telling them how I feel about it because it's just not for me. So sometimes you could just kind of do that, and it's, I feel, still a graceful way of being like, I can't do this because it doesn't fit my criteria, but you just didn't say all the criteria didn't fit.
I think another thing to keep in mind is the feeling that you're going to lose out on something if you say no. Another good
Yeah.
thing to keep in mind is that if you got the email to begin with, you're going to get another. This isn't a one-time thing, this, random magical thing that happened. Someone reached out to you because they value your opinion and they value what you can bring to the project, which means probably other people will value you just as much. So, yeah.
1,000%, yes. People do a lot of prepping and hemming and hawing before they start reaching out to editors because it's not cheap to do. So it is a very meaningful thing when people do ask you, to do that with them. So it is always nice to honor that and know that, hey, maybe another project will come around that I could help this person on. So leave the door open unless you don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get something like, like a pitch with like propaganda in it. I have no problem just being like, yo, what the fuck is this? Like, did you send this to me as a joke? Like, so there are certain things that it's like, burn that bridge when you don't want them emailing you. It's no problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, these were really great questions. Thank you guys for asking them. And Amanda, you covered so much information. I think my students are going to walk away feeling like, wow, my brain feels so big and heavy right now. Uh, so,
Sorry.
well, thank you so much. That is the end of our course today. So, if everyone can give a round of applause, a big thanks to Amanda.
Aw, thank you guys for listening to me yap.
Oh, whoop, my bad. Okay.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
just
so
putting hearts
anyway,
up there.
all right. Thank you so much, Amanda. I'll call you
Thank you.
later. And that's it. Goodbye.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Great questions.
Thing is that you learned today.